It's warmed up a little bit. It's at 34 degrees right now outside, so things are starting to defrost a little bit. But like the county has asked everybody to not drive around if at all possible, to like only drive. It's an absolute emergency. So we're kind of stuck at home. Not that we're absolutely stuck at home, but we're kind of stuck at home. And it's cold, so I don't really want to go outside. And I got bored, so let's make a video, right? Now, I thought it would be a good time to do a live stream. In this live stream, I really want to talk about like how it is that a lot of people are looking for an alternative for the currency that's out there. And this is something that I just don't think is really is even really a feasible thing. Like, I mean, yeah, there's all kinds of alternative currencies that can be out there available and we can use them. But as far as like, replacing the dollar kind of like alternative currency, it's just not really going to happen. Not in my opinion. I just don't see that coming. And so I'm going to break down a lot of the confusion for the gold standard as compared to like fiat currency or like, the dollar specifically. And and I know like a lot of people are looking for like that quick answer. This isn't something that is going to come fast. Like you have to really internalize this information. You have to really think about like some of the things that have happened over the history, how things are changing, how quickly it happens, and then how it is that we have to respond to it. Because although a lot of times things do happen quickly, when I see things changing, a lot of times I think it's really happening fast, but in reality, it's really a slow grind. So understanding it for yourself, understanding the complications with a lot of like, why don't we just go back to a gold standard kind of questions? This kind of video is really going to break that stuff down. And I don't think you can find that anywhere else. Like, I don't think anybody is really doing it on this kind of level where that you can engage in it. Now, this is a public, made for public viewing live stream, and I do membership only live streams. And in those membership only live streams, I read all the comments. We go through and we read and take seriously every single comment that is made within that video. I'm not saying that I don't take these comments seriously. I do, but there's just so many of them. There's no way I can get through all of them. So if you really want to, break this stuff down, really want to get some answers for some of the questions that you have, you want to ask the community questions that you know are going to get answered, consider joining the live stream. There's a link right in the description of this video. You can join those memberships for $1 a month. It's like almost no money to you, but it means everything to me. And I work hard at putting together a lot of links, a lot of ideas, a lot of, opinions that are from like a direction that is like our opinion, working class kind of style stuff, not something that's coming from 30,000 feet where none of us can really understand where the hell position they're even at, because we're not even close to that. This is a different level of understanding that you just don't get from anywhere else. So all right, so thank you for joining in. We got 54 people on the live stream right now. Do me a favor, go hit that like button. Hitting the like button will definitely grab the video and spread it around YouTube for more people to join in on this. It's a lot more fun when we have more people joining the live stream. Not to mention, it's great for the channel and, for ad revenue because, right now YouTube does not like the Uneducated Economist, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to slow down on content. So anyhow, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Griff, for becoming a member. Thank you. You just joined. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you all night for being up in here, man. You're never miss one of these things. It's amazing, man. You're everywhere all the time. I love it. So, all right. Hi, Simon. Frankenberg. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Hello. CBDCs are coming. All right. Deep freeze here in Canada. Yeah, I cannot imagine. Oh my gosh. Baby Croak Coin will list KuCoin soon. The team is working. All right. Only fools don't buy physical gold. All right, I'm just kind of blasting through some of these. Are you even on Coinbase, bro? Yeah, absolutely, I'm on Coinbase. Now, I'm going to start with that one real quick, and then we're going to move into some of these topics right here. Yes, I am on Coinbase. I want to give my opinion completely on a Coinbase. I have had an account with Coinbase since about 6 months after I'm guessing, for a very long time, about 6 months after they opened it up for like general public to have an account, right? So anybody could just sign up and have one. I linked my bank account to it. I bought some Bitcoin. I sent that Bitcoin over to a crooked exchange called Cryptsy. and Cripsy kept all my cryptocurrencies, and I was out of the game. I opened up another crypto or Coinbase account, so I have two of them. That second one, I've had it for quite a few number of years. I've had, that's my main one, the one that I use, and I've never had an issue with it, not once. Like, I know a lot of people are like, dude, how could you ever use it? You won't be able to get your money back. All this other stuff. I know I've heard the game all that time. I have the original account and I have the secondary account, and I've never had an issue with one of them ever, not once, other than maybe sometimes there was those, days in which that, login in wasn't available or whatever. But I've never had any kind of issues where I tried to receive or send or do or use it for any purpose and wasn't able to do it. I also own Coinbase. I own the stock. I own quite a bit of it now too, considering that the move that it has made over the course of the, last, what is it, even 6 weeks, 6, 8 weeks have been pretty decent, right? So anyway, those returns I haven't taken any profits or anything like that, but I own quite a bit of Coinbase stock considering my whole stock portfolio. It's a significant amount of that. And then, so that's my opinion on Coinbase. All right. And then also considering like how long they've been in the game, like I think these are the guys who are probably going to be most likely continuing to stick with it. They seem to be the ones who are dealing with the custodial holdings of Bitcoin for a lot of different institutions and stuff like that. They're making their way through Europe. It just, to me, like I don't look deep into Coinbase other than my real world use case of them, having been with them, never been, having any issues, and then seeing how prevalent they are within the media and the, everything that's going on out there, especially some of the things that are taking place in Europe. It seems to me that they are not going anywhere, but I could be wrong on that, and so I wouldn't take that for financial advice by any means. Okay, moving on here. 82 people up in here. We got 21 likes. Now let's get it up to at least 80 likes, right? I mean, with 82 people here. I'm just kidding. All right. Thank you so much, Griff, for the $1.99. May Jesus bless you and everyone in the chat. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for the super sticker there, for the super chat. Let's talk about this gold standard versus fiat, right? Now let's gold versus dollar. I mean, let's just call it that, because really, like, when we talk about fiat currencies, we're ultimately talking about the dollar, right? That's all we really care about. I mean, there's a lot of different fiat currencies out there, but it's just the dollar that's really our concern. Let's talk about gold standard, and why gold is actually a good thing, right? So gold is a good thing. Like, I am a firm believer in gold. I own gold. I hold silver. I'm a believer in the possession, the ownership, the physical ownership, possession of gold, not the ETF stuff, not necessarily going into miners and stuff like that, unless you're trying to make a move off of make some profit off of investment or something like that. But the physical holding of gold is just like, I'm a firm believer in that. And I'm not necessarily the believer that it's going to make me rich someday, but I hold it as an insurance policy. And many of you have heard my story talking about how I was basically had no ride to work. I was broke. I was like, I needed a car, and the only thing I had was silver. And I called up my buddy and asked him if he would trade a Tahoe for some silver. He said, absolutely, I'll do that. I gave him 165 ounces of silver. He signed over the title to a Tahoe, and I was on the road again. I had wheels. I am so grateful for that. Like, I will never, ever, ever, like, be in a position in which that I do not have that as an insurance policy. And that's my feelings about it. Now, a lot of people look at it as something that's going to go up to $500 an ounce and they're going to make a bunch of money off of it and stuff like that. I don't. Okay. That's not my position on it. I look at it as an insurance, not a speculation at all. Okay. But gold standard, there's a lot of great features about the gold standard. Number one, stable, right? Stability. That's what everybody really wants in their life anyway, is just to be stable, right? They don't want something that is going to be different from anything that they expected it from today, right? I mean, if they get it today, they expect it to be the same tomorrow. If it's not, that's unstable. They don't feel good about it. They're uncertain about the future. Everything is bad about that. Gold provides that stability. It's like guaranteed almost. There is no way that you cannot look at it as a stable item unless you're comparing it to, fiat currencies, and then a lot of times you can see that there's some volatility there. But over time, for the most part, you're going to find historically that gold is probably the most stable thing that could ever exist out there. Keeps prices stable, keeps savings stable, all that. And that's another key to it is savings, right? So like everybody really wants to know that, at some point in the future, especially if they work hard for it today, that they'll be able to buy what they can in the future. And that's what gold really does for you, especially on a gold standard, is that it keeps those prices stable, and the savings is then like actually feasible. Like you can actually save for the future. You don't have to worry about making sure that it has an interest rate to it and being eaten up by inflation. That doesn't typically happen when you're sitting on a gold standard. And the best part, my favorite part about having a gold standard is limited government, right? If you can limit the government, I am happy about it. The less government, the better, in my opinion. Like I don't want them involved in anything that I do at all. However, I can't get away from it, and I know that it exists. And if we had a gold standard, the government would be incredibly limited. Like they could only spend so much, whatever they could get in tax revenue, and then they would really have to justify why it is that they're spending all this money, and we would not be, nobody would be in the position that they're in today. So huge differences going on in the gold standard. Bad things about the gold standard list, like go ahead and cover them because there is issues that come with the gold standard. One, it's limited, right? Government cannot participate in stimulus programs when things go bad. They are limited to whatever it is that they have with tax revenues unless they go into debt, which is so much easier when you have a fiat currency and a central bank that's willing to print the money and buy it. Government is limited during those downturns, those bad times, and people just literally have to suffer through it with not a lot of government intervention happening because they are limited with that gold standard. So in a lot of people's opinion, that's a bad thing, right? Now, again, it's kind of more about how you look at it, but still, it's that limits government. Um, Booms and bust cycles. This is something that a lot of people don't realize that takes place during the gold standard, is that you have regular boom and bust cycles that are in the business cycle. It's like when you have a limited amount of currency, which is still part of the gold standard, you eventually start concentrating the wealth, and then there's less money out there to do transactions with. This is one of the reasons why the Federal Reserve was even created, is to have an elastic money supply. So when the economy was getting hot and this concentration of wealth began to take place, all these transactions happening, and the most industrious people start gathering, all the coins, all the money, all the gold, the fiat currency that came in was going to make it elastic. Well, this was limited with the gold standard, and so you would have these booms and busts. There would be the acquiring of gold, and then there would be this like bust time when nobody would be able to do any transactions, nobody was buying anything, nobody was working, then boom, that gold would get redistributed out, and then it would all start over again. And then also like it's it also kind of limits the industriousness of the people. Like when you're on a gold standard, you have the limitation of where interest rates are going to be for the most part without the central bank. When you have a limitation on interest rates, on where money comes from, because like right now you think about it, money just comes from wherever. Nobody really thinks about it. It's just like, oh, I want to get a loan. You just go down to the bank. I want a loan, right? But with the gold standard, you really have to borrow gold from somebody, right? I mean, you got to go and say, hey man, I need your physical gold for the most part. Now I understand like it would be in the bank, and there's like, lots of ways to make this happen, but still you're limited to the amount of gold that's available out there to borrow. And if people are stingy with it, they're like, no, I don't want it. I don't want to lend it out. Well, then the interest rates can go way up, and this can limit somebody's good idea. Like somebody may have an idea for a business or something that, may bring some benefit to society or whatever. And they can't really do it because the literally the ability to acquire the money through lending is just not available to them. And so their good idea never takes off. So this is kind of a limitation within the gold standard. And that one's kind of like a lesser one, in my opinion. I think like any good idea would probably just find its way through. Like necessity is the mother of invention, and no matter what kind of economic condition you're in, you're going to find good ideas coming through. But still, if you can borrow money to push your good idea, I could see where like being able to borrow can really benefit, and that's limited a lot in the gold standard. All right, so let's talk about fiat currencies. And now let's talk about some of the good things that come from that. Right, and that's one of the things about it, good fiat, or the good things about fiat, if there is a good thing about it. And in my opinion, it's not a good or bad thing. It's just an is, and you just have to look at it for what it is. But some of the features that I guess would be a benefit of the fiat is that government intervention, right? Being able to print up money and stimulus, and act when natural disasters or war or something else is happening there. With the fiat currency, that can happen very quickly and almost instantaneously. Gold is a little different, right? Because you actually have to come up with that money or borrow it from somebody who thinks that you're going to pay it back, and there's a very huge limitation on that. Right? Again, with the fiat currency, you have those good ideas that can be generated, and you see that happening a lot, especially like after recession. Like when the government goes into stimulus to try and get people moving again. Those stimulus checks, those recessionary moments that have cleared out all the bad debt, all the malinvestment, that leaves room for a lot of like really good growth from people who have some really good ideas. And a lot of times they're sitting in a position in which they have been heavily damaged, and it's not like they can get their idea for a pizza restaurant off the ground right now, but if they could borrow money from it, then they would be able to do it. This is again where the fiat currency really does well. And again, like it increases the whole point of the fiat currency, like from the central bank, was to increase transactions, right? And that's really what it is an elastic money supply. So when the economy is really heating up and you can provide more currency into the system, then more people are able to do transactions, more people are, being able to build houses and buy cars and go on vacation and do all the things that, like you would expect to be able to do. However, that's not available if the fiat currency wasn't necessarily an elastic money supply, just providing that liquidity for everybody to just have. So again, like I'm not trying to promote it. I'm just trying to say some of the benefits that would come from having a gold or having a fiat standard or having the fiat standard. Okay, bad features about it, right? Government intervention again, right? Government can intervene in ways that I just feel are just super inappropriate, and they would not be able to do these things. And that's again, a lot of this is politically minded, so I'm not going to get into it because you can pick out your own things from the government that they spend money on that they really shouldn't. However, that's up to, each individual's opinion on that, but it does happen. And so it's just like the fact that it actually occurs is just the point of it. It's just like that's a bad thing. Like government can intervene in anything they want, spending money at will. However, and like there's almost like nothing we can really do to prevent it from taking place, no matter how much it pisses us off. Right? Bad things about the fiat. Irrational exuberance. This is something that I think is going to be a feature of fiat currency that people love and hate at the same time. And the irrational exuberance is like, I'll give you an example of irrational exuberance. All right. I worked for a company, and I don't mean anything against this company that I worked for, because the owner of the company is like actually a customer of ours. Super awesome dude, right? But he is somebody who really likes nice things, right? And that's all I can really say about it. And he built some really nice lumber yards, and the stores themselves were the most beautiful lumberyard hardware stores that you could ever possibly imagine. Like, I'm serious. Murals on the walls, heated floors, nothing out of place, clear vertical grain fur trim table, like everything was the top of the line, most beautiful thing you could ever imagine. I loved working there. The bathrooms there were cleaner and more beautiful and nicer than even the finest restaurants. So I'm serious when I say this. I loved working this store. If you want to see a video, type in Google search tour of a dying business, and you will find a video that I had done from a channel called Overcast Astoria. And in that you can see I did a tour of these things. So anyway, irrational exuberance. These buildings were freaking nice, and they were expensive, and there was two of them, and there was a lot of debt that went into them. And during the great run up prior to the great financial crisis, the housing boom that had happened during that time was one of the most awesome things that could ever have taken place in our particular area here, and it really did a number for these lumber yards, right? They were in it. They were doing well. And he built the nicest lumber yards you can imagine. The trucks were beautiful, like all these beautiful, big, beautiful boom trucks. And I mean, I'm serious. It was, ask anybody, it was nice, right? Anyhow, so when the recession kicks in, great financial crisis, and all of a sudden building just goes into the toilet, doesn't matter how many, like we could have sold, I worked for these lumber yards for the final days. It was a few years after the great financial crisis, and it didn't matter. Like after this point, after like '07 and went into like, I think they shut down in 2012. So they lasted a few years, but it didn't matter. They could have sold every single 2x4 in the county and no other lumber yard participated, and it still wouldn't have been enough, right? I mean, these guys like scratched by as much as they could for the longest time until eventually they had to shut the doors and both of the buildings went out of business. Like both buildings got auctioned off, the whole thing went out of business. And this was the problem, is that it was a way too big of an expansion on these buildings, right? They want way too much. And when you overexpand like that and you can't make the payments anymore, then it's all over. You go bankrupt. And the irrational exuberance happens not only in an individual, it can happen in businesses, it can happen in countries, I would assume, right? So this irrational exuberance is a common feature of fiat currency. When you have access to credit and no real like limitation on where that money can go, then it ends up going into places that it really shouldn't have been in the first place, and that's what ends up being the results of it. And so the final feature that is bad of fiat currency is the inflation. Now, something that I find interesting about the inflation aspect of it is that even though inflation does exist in things like fiat currency when it comes to places like Zimbabwe and the Weimar Republic and, you know, many examples, Venezuela, there's many examples of fiat currency going into like hyperinflation scenarios where it's just like, you know, the fiat currency completely destroys itself. And a lot of people are under that impression what's with the dollar itself. And yes, it very well could happen to the dollar. There's no reason why it couldn't. The dollar sits in a much different position than Venezuela or the Weimar Republic or Zimbabwe, especially. It doesn't, those nations didn't have the world reserve currency status, and that is a major difference when it comes to the fiat currency out there and being like something that goes into a hyperinflation scenario. When you have a demand for it around the world such as that of the dollar, it puts it in a much different position than these lesser nations. I shouldn't say lesser nations, but these lesser nations out there that that had currencies that went into that hyperinflation scenario. And the main difference is that there is a huge demand for dollars that is not like the other nations have, right? It's not the same. The demand for dollars exists in a fashion that came into an existence unlike any of these other alternative currencies or current currencies or any other currencies can do, right? And see, this is the major difference that happened here, is because the gold standard was it. Like, I mean, if you think about it, nobody in their right mind would trade anything for anything other than a physical item that they know they could use, right? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Like you either got to provide a service or you got to provide something of value to me, right? I mean, that's the only reason why you would trade anything for anything. But yet somehow this fiat currency gets printed at will and nobody really questions it. It just kind of goes out there and everybody's just like, well, you know, what other choice do we have? It's just like, that's it. So give me the money, right? But this money doesn't have any like real value to it. And yet people just use it. It doesn't make any sense why, right? But yet it does when you think about the history of how it is that it actually came into an existence and you realize it was done through trickery, but not even that anymore. It's now based on debt, and debt is the key to it all, right? That's why the whole like idea that there's going to be a debt jubilee, just like, I don't think so, right? And it's because of the fact that the dollar has replaced gold as that means of providing the world with the ability to do transactions. Mainly it's the liquidity that comes from behind it. Okay, so gold was the main main product, right? It was the one that everybody wanted. You recognized it around the world, knew that what it was. It had the same value, whether it was, here in Oregon or if it was in China or Australia or anywhere else you were in the world. Gold is gold, and it doesn't matter what it is. That's why everybody liked it, right? Silver too, right? Silver, same as gold. So when it came to doing world trade, like you presented gold or silver to anybody, they're like, yep, I'll take it, right? And so this was the main form of world currency, and it was awesome, and everybody knew it, and everybody wanted it, and everybody liked it, and it worked. So when it came to the United States becoming a manufacturing powerhouse, this is the main problem when it comes to having a gold standard or any kind of currency that is fixed. And that is the most industrious people will then acquire all the money. Just like the booms and bust cycles that comes from the gold standard, a nation will itself acquire all the gold, and the United States was one of them. We manufactured all the best stuff in the entire world. Nobody was touching us. We had it. We had it all, right? We were the we were the best at everything. And so we sold it all to the world, and the world would send us their gold, right? Well, we got to a point where we were really enjoying the gold, right? We enjoyed it. We loved it. We were like, hey, man, take out, all this gold is awesome. We get to increase our standard of living. We did. We enjoyed it. We enjoyed the money. That standard of living meant that we were starting to import new stuff. That new stuff was coming from these foreigners who wanted what? Gold, right? So now all of a sudden we found ourselves with a higher standard of living, importing a lot more stuff than we had realized, and we're exporting a lot of gold. And guess what? That was going to be a problem, right? Now, as this was taking place, the gold started being used or replaced with the dollar, right? Because everybody wanted the dollar, right, to do as transactions because it provided the liquidity, and they knew that they could use it for trading for gold. So now, as the gold started becoming limited, the dollars started becoming more prevalent. And this is really where a key comes in, where the whole thing starts to find itself in a position in which that is very unique, right? So as people were like, well, shoot, if I can trade these dollars for gold, and everybody looks at the dollars as if they were gold, and the United States is like a manufacturing powerhouse and buying all this stuff, sounds like a pretty good deal, right? So all these nations were like, well, yeah, shit, we'll accept dollars. And the United States is like, yeah, of course you will, right? And so we started printing up a lot of dollars and issuing those out. Well, once they realized, it was like, wait a minute now, these dollars not exchangeable for gold, are they? And it was just like, no, not really, because there's definitely a lot more dollars out there than there is gold. And the people were like, okay, no, this isn't going to work, right? And the countries are like, okay, so we're going to start cashing in all these dollars for gold. And the United States was like, nah, Nixon was like, I don't think so, right? And so they severed the gold standard, and they're like, this isn't going to take place. Not like this. So we're going to keep the gold, and we're just going to keep issuing out dollars. And I don't know, we'll just issue out debt, and we won't have to produce anything anymore. And now we're in that position. So now we're sitting in a position in which that we issue out a lot of debt. And it seems like, man, why would anybody even want this stuff, right? Like, why would anybody want anything to do with the United States? What are they doing that's any differently than anything else, right? Well, it comes to the United States treasuries, right? And believe it or not, this is the safe and liquid asset. This is the ability to hold on to something and do transactions and not have to take the risk of loss or storage or security or anything else like that. This is something that all of a sudden the world is using that not only had a benefit for holding on to because it paid an interest, but then it also was capable of doing world trade. We're talking the U.S. treasuries. We're not even talking about dollars. Right? The United States was providing the world with something that they could use that they had never had before. And the United States was easily able to just go deep into debt as people were trusting this, right? Even though there was bumps along the way. I'm not saying that didn't happen during the early 80s and they haven't raised the interest rates up. But this is the ultimate story that came down. And so now the world is in need of something that provides that liquidity for doing transactions. And the US Treasuries is what really ultimately does it. And we find that the deeper that the United States goes into debt, the more difficult it is to try and maintain this debt, the more the world actually demands this debt from the United States. It's hard to believe. See, I wonder, like at times when I see the Federal Reserve going into their money printing scheme, I'm thinking, okay, can you even print at a pace that is fast enough to cover all the debts that are due in dollars? Right. See, this is the level of of problems that the Federal Reserve faces when they have not only a monetary policy to conduct here in the United States, but then also have to provide the world with with the currency itself, right? Provide the world with that world reserve currency. And so the United States is one of the only willing participants and probably can not one of the only willing participants to go that deep into debt to provide the world with that safe and liquid asset of the US Treasuries. There's nothing else that can do that. Not XRP, not Bitcoin, not gold, nothing else. Nothing else can do what it is that the dollar is doing right now. All right. And I'm not saying that it's a good thing, because it is not. It's a bad thing, actually. And when you think about it on a deeper level, this is the reason why there is such a separation between the rich and the poor, and it will ever grow, right? I mean, sure, it gives us an opportunity to expand on our dreams, I guess. If you have a good idea for starting a restaurant, you can go deep into debt and be a slave to do it, right? But, whatever. It's a good idea, right? Why don't you take off and go do it? Go borrow that money, right? This is the level of condition that we are now in. I mean, I get it. I understand. What else are you going to do? But when you think about how it is that the rich and the poor get separated, it separates with new money pouring into the system. And we are now in a system in which that they have ever increasing amounts of new money that constantly pours in. It's going to be an ever increasing separation between the rich and the poor. You know, got to understand it on that level. How many of you enjoying this? We're at half an hour. I talked a half an hour straight. Are you kidding me? Oh my gosh. I'm surprised you guys are here. All right. And 169 of you too. That's awesome. We got 62 likes. Let's get it up to 100 likes. Let's do that here in the next few minutes. I'm going to start reading some comments. I've been seeing the comments flying through, and I'm sorry. I'm not going to be able to go back and read all those. But if you have any questions right now, I'm going to start reading from here, or I'm just going to back it up just a little bit and start reading, and maybe we can talk about some of the questions what we might have about what's going on within the whole liquidity game of what it is that is going to be presented to us. I don't think so. What's going to rise next? There we go. As far as currencies go, because Gresham's law says that bad currency chases out good. There is no good currency that can come in. There's only something that can match and then replace. And that's how the dollar was able to do it. It's like everybody thought it was as good as gold because they could trade it for gold. So there isn't a replacement. It tricked everybody. It was just the same thing. It thought it was, basically as having like one as having the other. So that's how another currency, I believe, would come in to replace the dollar, is if it was trading as if it was the dollar, something like a stable coin. And then you think about it, if it was a stable coins are backed by dollars, but they don't necessarily need to be backed by dollars, right? Stable coin can be backed by anything at that point. But really, in my opinion, it's going to be something that is going to have to trade equally with the dollar, or looked at as if it was as on par with the dollar in order for it to replace it. Okay, here we go. 180 people, 82 likes. Thank you so much. Doom and gloom, that never happens. All right, Greg, nice to see you here, man. All right, thanks, Simon. Enjoy hearing your opinions. 30 minutes isn't too long. All right, Crypto Beauty, thank you so much for the view and the comment. All right, where Japan hyperinflation? Japan is internal debt, though, Greg. All right, what if U.S. comes out with a cryptocurrency of its own? Well, I mean, what if it does? Like, I mean, what difference does it really make if they do? In my opinion, it's just like, the cryptocurrency part of things when it comes to like the dollar itself. I could only imagine that the only difference that would make considering that we have almost digital transactions happening now, is that it would take cash, it would give the ability to take cash out of the system, and then it would make negative interest rates a real possibility. So, in my opinion, like really, I don't know what difference like a digital currency would do or anything else as far as like, changing the way that we conduct business. However, if you were able to take cash completely out, then I think that would change the way things can be done, because then you couldn't remove yourself from the banking system, and that would be different. I don't understand how the amount of debt directly causes income inequality. All right. How the amount of debt directly, it's not necessarily the amount of debt that is doing it, because I think that's probably a misconception from a lot of things that we hear out there. And it is at the same time, because what is happening, it's really, you got to understand the Cantillon effect. Okay, because this is, if you understand like what's happening when it comes to Cantillon's, the Cantillon effect, then it makes a lot more sense on how it is it's this new injection of debt that comes into the system, continuously separates the rich from the poor, right? So now I'm going to try and briefly describe the Cantillon effect for you, but it's kind of complicated, so I'm going to hopefully get through it very quickly without making it too, like, without messing it up too much. Okay. So if you can imagine that there's a particular area, right? And we're going to take it back, a million years, whatever. No, we'll take it back just a few hundred years. And we imagine that this particular area has a silver mine that comes into, operation, right? And so we're just going to use the silver mine as an example, as new money coming into this particular area. It could be the Federal Reserve printing up money and injecting it into the system, whatever. It's just like, this is just a way to kind of understand how the new money comes in. So the silver mine comes online, it's starting to produce silver, and it's in, and these workers and everybody who owns the mine and all that other stuff is now coming into new money, who starts spending it, right? So now, just like anybody out there, right? If you are going to get an increase in money, right? You are going to enjoy that money. You're not going to sit there and go like, wow, I got new money. That's cool. Sit it on the shelf and not worry about it. Some people might do that, but most people aren't. Most people are going to be like, okay, cool. Now I'm going to eat 2 ribeyes. I'm going to enjoy nicer, car. Back in the day, it was a wagon or car carriage or whatever. I'm going to enjoy a nicer house. I'm going to enjoy all these nicer things, right? And so if you can imagine like this new money coming in and all the people who are spending this new money on these new things that they have, or more things that they want, the people who now have access to that, right? So you're talking like the tailor, the butcher, the wagon maker, all those people, right? They're all of a sudden enjoying this new money too, right? So they have first access to this money, and they start enjoying 2 ribeyes and nicer food or nicer clothes and whatever it is that they enjoy, right? However, the people at the end of the line, they haven't gotten the money yet, right? Because the money hasn't quite trickled down to them. Unfortunately, though, for them, is that all this added money coming into the system that these people are getting first, and increase in their consumption, is now starting to create a limitation, right? You got the supply and demand imbalance beginning to take place as the people with the new money start consuming more, right? That consuming, added consumption, right? Lower supply demand imbalances, prices start to rise. Now, this is the main problem that really starts to take place as it starts to separate the poor. They're like, yo, we haven't got the new money, and those 2 ribeyes you're buying is limiting the amount of ribeye. They're expensive now, right? So now what am I going to do? I'm at the end of the line, and I'm not earning any more money. And this new money that's coming in is separating me from you, as you are enjoying that new money and I'm not, right? So this is the separation from the rich and the poor as the new money comes in. It doesn't matter how it shows up. It's just the fact that it is showing up, and the people who have first access to it, what they enjoy and what what their preferences are. So again, it doesn't matter how it comes in, but this is the eventual way it comes in. If this continues, this is the main problem with it, is that if it continues, what's going to eventually end up happening is that the people who are going to enjoy this new money coming in and having this added consumption, eating these new steaks and enjoying the new clothes and having the bigger wagon and nicer houses and stuff, and causing the prices to move up, making it difficult that the people at the end of the line, are going to go, you know what, F you, I'm out, I'm bailing out of here, all right, because it doesn't pay enough. Oh, I'm sorry, you want to pay me more to stick around? I get it. So now, down at the very end of the time, we finally get a little bit of a wage increase, but it's barely enough to keep up, right? It's just enough to keep us here. See the problem with this is? So most of the time, you either have to leave to go find a better place to be, go, or else lower your standard of living, or just grow accustomed to it, or whatever. Right? Now, the people who have first access to this money, again, they're looking at this and going, okay, great. Great. Now we got this new money. We finally get the new money, right? And we want to enjoy this new money, but yet everything gets more expensive. That sucks. It sucks for us, man. Us with the new money. It sucks that we have to pay for higher prices on all this stuff. You know what? Those foreigners over there, they produce the same thing that you all are producing. You know that, right? And it's like the same price, and it's almost as good. So we're just going to start buying this foreign products, right? So the new money comes in, and all of a sudden, foreign production starts to creep in, right? The more the new money comes in, the more foreign production comes in, the more domestic manufacturing begins to leave. So ever increasing amounts of domestic manufacturing leaves as ever increasing amounts of new money comes in, buying ever increasing amounts of foreign production. Pretty soon it's only advantageous to the people who have first access to the money, the people who are participating in the foreign production coming in and sales of that, and the foreigners themselves. Everybody else at the end of the line suffers in poverty. Now, the problem with this whole system is that once the new money turns off, everybody falls into poverty because we don't manufacture anything for ourselves. And this is the condition that the United States is in. Now, if we keep the new money pouring in, we're going to have this ever increasing amounts of separation from the rich from the poor. But, because you get to expand on your good ideas, you get to start the pizza parlor. Isn't that great? I mean, be fortunate. You live in a great country. Right? This is the condition we're in. So, wasn't that a good story? You guys like that? Was that a fun story? All right. I'm going to cruise back down here to the bottom, guys. All right. Thank you so much for being here. We got 200 people watching. This is awesome. All right. 101 likes with 203 people watching. Let's get it up to 150 here in the next 10 minutes. All right. 150 likes. They don't need much to justify to their people compared to the U.S., where there is more distrust. Gotta consider the metrics in aggregate. Okay. Ultimately, energy is the real money. It's called taxes. That's how you justify it. Japan is the developed economy. What's called taxes? America can easily start manufacturing again. Manufacturing is easy. Mr. Cheerful. I disagree. But I do agree. I think that the United States is probably one of the most industrious style people there could possibly be. We have better ideas and concepts and ingenuity and all that other stuff than you could ever possibly imagine from any other nation. The only problem is that we kind of ate that up. Like we kind of screwed that up, and it doesn't really go backwards, like without devastation. You can see it throughout many societies throughout history, is that it grows weak over time. The more money you get coming in, the weaker the people that get themselves, the softer they are. The men don't behave like men anymore. And it's just common. Look at my wife and I were talking about this just today. We were talking about the rise and fall of Rome, and it took over 1,000 years, and the last 300 years were the downfall of it. It took 300 years, but it was very quickly towards the very end. But the actual peaking of the whole empire and everything had many many long years at that peak, were spent up there, and probably very few people noticed how bad it was really getting towards the end, when everybody was probably just behaving as if everything is fine and nothing's really going on, like most people do when they're heavily in debt and don't know what it is that they're going to do to try and keep their life going in the fashion that they had, knowing that it was only financed, because of like everything that they had done in the past, but they don't have that past to them anymore. Mainly, like with Rome, it was fighting wars and conquering people. They ran out of people to kill. Then your whole game is over, right? You can't get new money in. That's how they did it. So the United States is very much in that same position. Like, how do we get the new money coming in? Like, we can manufacture stuff, but what you're going to have to ask people to do, because we're heavily in debt, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to tell people around the world, right? This is what's funny about it, is that I try to imagine what it would be like, right? Because what it would take is the United States to work incredibly hard, really hard at manufacturing things that people would want, be competitive at that, right? To be able to sell those things to the world, right? Because ultimately we borrowed money, so we got to pay that money back, right? So we got to be able to provide them with something, right? So we got to provide them with the product. So we got to be able to produce something that is going to be competitive, which means that we have to have like incredibly cheap labor and not take a lot for ourselves and build a really nice product, right? And then if we do bring money in, pay that debt off. So we're working incredibly hard and not taking anything for ourselves. And we're going to have to do that for generations, generations of people, right? To have this sort of mindset and this sort of level of activity where they live a very meager life. And like, I'm talking like, you know, two or three pairs of shoes throughout your entire life kind of stuff, like you don't have luxuries, you don't wear stuff, you just manufacture, go to work hard every day, and you pay off the debts, because this is the level of debts that the United States has put itself into. Like, there is no getting out of this. Like, if you want to work your way out, it's like generations of hardcore slave labor kind of conditions of life, where you do not enjoy any kind of luxuries whatsoever, and you just work damn hard producing and manufacturing and attempting to sell that stuff to the world. And maybe, okay, we might become a manufacturing state again, I guess. But as far as like going back to, like, we have a standard of living that is financed off of debt. There is no level of manufacturing that we can do that's gonna find that's gonna pay for this. There's like, it's not gonna happen, right? And so you think about it, it's just like the only way that the United States is going to be able to continue on is the fact that the demand for dollar does exist, and the dollar, good Lord, the dollar demand does exist out there. When you just think about how many contracts, just think about all the debts that are due in dollars. And I know a lot of people like say, well, they'll just like default on those debts. No, no, okay, it doesn't quite work like that. Right. So here, let's take there's so many debts to think about too, right? United States treasuries, for example, right? How many people own United States treasuries? I read somewhere it was just like China has a bunch of these United States treasuries and they're just going to dump them all. No, they won't. You know why? Because if they start dumping those United States treasuries, the yields are going to fucking rise and the price is going to collapse. And it will be like setting them on fire, and they would get no benefit from doing that. Now, I don't mean to sound like, all aggressive and cussing and all that other stuff, but that's exactly what would happen. They can't dump, if they dump them, they throw them out there and say, I don't want these things. The price of them would start to fall dramatically, right? And the amount of cash that they would get for that would shrink dramatically. They are already in terrible shape. They would not do that. That is not a smart, no way in the world would somebody do that. That is not smart, right? Now, they might do it for like, say like last ditch effort to try and destroy the United States with finance, but it would be destroying themselves in the meantime. So I just don't see that as a possibility, right? Anytime that you are reading about how there are nations or anybody else out there dumping US treasuries, what they are really doing is getting into cash, because it's the easiest way to cash. There is no faster way to cash, in fact, other than through the US treasuries. So when they are dumping out those treasuries, they are getting into cash, and most likely they're getting into cash because they have cash, excuse me, They have dollar-denominated debts that are due, and they need to acquire the cash in order to pay those debts, and that's generally what has taken place during those times. Most people won't tell you that, but that's the truth of it. And I'm not saying that there isn't times when they're like, hey, I mean, piss on the United States. I want to get out of a bunch of treasuries. I'm not saying there isn't like times that that's probably existing out there, but for the most part, they are not going to weaponize that kind of thing unless they are prepared to just burn, like let their cash just burn on fire as if it doesn't even mean anything to them. Nobody does that. That's not going to happen like that. Uh, Okay. Hey, thank you very much, Infamous NYC, for the $20. Just easier system. What is it? Feudals? I gotta put my glasses on here. Okay. This easier feudals. Gosh, this color is really hard to read. It's orange. The owners of the system benefit at the expense of the many just it's just socialism at the end of the day. You're right. You own nothing, not even your own home, and pay the lord of the land, aka landlord. That's right. And thank you very much for the $20. I really appreciate that, Infamous NYC. Very generous of you. I appreciate it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is like it's the ultimate form of socialism. Anytime that you can ever keep the people like, basically indebted and then also like reliant upon them, reliant upon the system. Those two things, like that's like basically the heart of it, the heart of socialism. All right, you guys having fun? We've been out here for 50 minutes. I'm going to give it another 10 minutes and then I'm going to call it. But before I do, I just want to give it another shout out to join the membership. If you're really enjoying this live stream, you can always join the membership when we do the live streams. I read every single comment that comes through on those live streams. You get to ask questions of me, ones that will actually get addressed, answered. You can ask questions of the community. They love answering and having a great conversation within that. A lot of times it just takes off and it doesn't have anything to do with whatever I'm talking about. But those live streams are a way that you can really get in there and figure out what it is that you need to do for yourselves. A lot of times there's just a couple of questions that really need to be asked in order for you to kind of fit those pieces together. And those are the places that you can go do it. So again, if you're really enjoying this live stream, consider joining the channel. It's $1 a month. It doesn't cost you anything, but I put a lot of work into them. I'm really enjoying them, and I feel that I put more value into those than I do my regular videos just because of the fact that I'm asking for that dollar. Again, it doesn't mean anything to you, but it means everything to me. So yeah, please consider joining the channel, and we'll see you in the next live stream that we do, which will probably be Wednesday. I'm assuming that Wednesday and Saturday are going to be our days for doing live streams. So far, that works out all right. Okay. Never Coinbase, Uphold, and Trezor Model T. Yeah, and I tell you, I have to say, Patrick was really upset with me. He was you remember Patrick Haycom? He put on the Silver Symposium event. He was like, oh man, Coinbase, really, bro? You're like, like I stuck a heart in his knife or stuck a knife in his heart. He just couldn't believe that I was like, using Coinbase, and I'm like, oh, I'm an amateur. What do I say? Any nation on the gold standard would run out of money in the middle of a war. Crypto gold people are clowns. I wouldn't necessarily call them clowns. I think they got a great idea, and I'm, a participant. In fact, I own more in cryptocurrencies. Like cryptocurrencies is the biggest portion of any of my assets or anything that I hold. I have more in cryptocurrencies than I do anything else. And that was quite accidental. I mean, I didn't mean to do it, but I've been dollar cost averaging for so long, and it's quite a volatile, thing. And I had a huge chunk handed to me, quite a few years ago. So to me, like, I'm a big fan of cryptocurrencies, but I don't put a whole lot of expectations into them. I mean, my expectation of cryptocurrency is really, really low. All right. Capitalism, the system that needs people reliant on a piece of paper to get on the hamster wheel, sounds like fun. Money is just smoke screen on what actually matters. I do have a ledger too. Not bad, but not as good now. All right. Infamous NYC, thanks again for the $5. I would imagine this is why the Bible God banned usury because it creates perpetual debt slavery and why we had the year of Jubilee to free the people. Yeah, and I can imagine that's true too, because when you think about it, if you have a gold-based currency and you start issuing out a lot of debt, like telling people, yeah, you can go into debt, you can go into debt. Well, eventually you're going to have, there's no way that they're going to be able to acquire the gold and pay off all the debt. So there's going to be like, you can literally put people into debt slavery in which that there's never a chance in which that they could get out of debt. I could see where that would be very criminal in just human nature. Like just the thought of that alone is just like, man, you shouldn't do that, right? And I mean, I guess to each their own. It was like somebody is out there. So it's like, hey, screw those people. They may not be able to get out of it. I can. I'm cool with it, right? But for the most part, that sort of like system where that not everybody's going to be able to get out. That's kind of criminal in my opinion, right? So it doesn't make this one not criminal. Like this fiat currency system is just as criminal in my opinion. But it is in a way that you can actually get out of the debt and actually be in a way that you can be the capitalist in which that you benefit from all this debt that's out there and it's paying you and you're not paying it. So, I mean, it's all depending on the position that you have decided to take. It's not a good or bad thing, it's just an is, right? Okay, 5 more minutes, guys, and then we're gonna have to call it quits. Although I want to keep staying out here because this is so much fun. All right, back to infamous NYC. $5 and why God said land was not allowed to be sold, so it always remained in the family. They could live and produce under it, passed down to the next. Well, there's a problem with that one. Hold on. I mean, thank you very much for the $5. I don't mean to push back against this, but I mean, you think about it. Let's take for example, you have like 100 acres and 100 guys, and each one of them gets an acre, right? And we're just going to use this for an example because you get 100 guys and 100 acres, and each one of them has an acre. And let's just say, for example, that acre happens to do it for each one of them. They can produce everything they need for not only themselves, but their family and all that. We're just going to hypothetically say this, right? And now just as well as I do that not all those families are going to be the same, right? Some of them are going to have 8 kids, and some of them are going to have 1 kid. Maybe somebody doesn't have any kids, right? And so when the next generation acquires that acre of land and one of them has to divvy it up amongst 8 of them, and then there's one guy over there who is the only son who gets the entire thing. Now, all of a sudden, he's doing much, much, much better than the one who has to divvy it up. And then those 8 kids, well, they're kind of into it. So they have 8 kids themselves and they got to divvy up their little eighth of an acre up amongst another 8 of them. They don't have any property whatsoever. They're all standing on a little square foot of property. They ain't nothing. They don't belong. They don't have nothing, right? Meanwhile, the other guy only had one, and the neighbor who didn't have any, who passed away, he didn't have any kids. He really liked the neighbor's kid, and he says, "Here, man, you can have my acre." He goes, "I'm not I don't have anybody to leave it to anyway, so you can have it." So this dude has 2 acres. Meanwhile, homeboy over there who had 1 acre with 8 kids who had 8 kids themselves, it's just like this isn't going to work. And so this idea that you can divvy up the land equally and then it'll maintain that doesn't it won't. It'll immediately start to fall apart and it'll be a concentration to the hands of a few. And only a few property owners will actually exist at the end of it. And it's not like something that I think is a good thing. Like I want to try to reiterate that when I say these things, that I'm not trying to be like an advocate for this or anything, but this is the ultimate reason why it happens, and it's the concentration and why it all comes down to a handful of property owners, and why it is that there's only 3 people who live independently of the state: the prince, the property owner, and the capitalist who invest into this system. And this is where it gets really difficult to try and say, man, how do you prevent that from happening? You can't. So anyhow, moving on. Thank you. Thank you, infamous NYC, for the $5. And like I said, that's like, at least that's kind of the idea that I got. And I actually got that out of Cantion's essay because he kind of addressed that whole thing. All right. Hi from the Philippines. Good stuff. All right. Well, thank you very much. Did I get another one? Yeah, I did right there. Dan Milliken. Man, I went to school with a Dan Milliken. I don't think you're the same one though, but man, that would be cool if you were, man. All right. $10 super chat, man. Very cool. The color is hard to read. Oh, wait a minute. I guess if I put my glasses on, I'd read that. There we go. All right. Thank you for the crash course on Cantillon effect. That was a brilliant explanation. Well, thank you, Dan. I mean, okay. I appreciate it, man. And that's really, there's four economic theories that I have taken on, and a lot of you who have been following me on this channel know about these four economic theories. It's the Cantillon effect, Gresham's law, Triffin's dilemma, and the bullwhip effect. And between those four economic theories, if you study them, if you really kind of understand them and internalize them, hardwire them into your mind so that you recognize what it's happening, when it's happening, then it starts answering a lot of the questions that we have out there. Cantillon effect is one of them. Like just what I had, how I described it there just a few minutes ago. I mean, once you kind of figure that part out, man, you're like, geez, this is it. This is like how the United States ended up losing its manufacturing base and understanding that it's probably not going to come back. Not in any kind of meaningful way, not unless we really change the way that we live our lives, right? And I just don't see that happening. When it comes to Gresham's law, this is the other thing. This is probably something I should have added as we were talking about the golden fiat. Jeez, I need to slow down, right? As we talk about the golden fiat currencies out there, I probably should have added and talked about Gresham's law. Now, Gresham's law is when bad money chases out good. And this is one of the reasons why it's going to be very difficult for any nation or any currency or anything else to replace the dollar. It doesn't quite go like that. There is no replacing the dollar, right? Because of Gresham's law being that if you have a good currency and a bad currency, the bad currency is going to chase out the good. Meaning that if you went to a merchant, right? You go to a store, you go to a guy and he's like, hey man, I like the ribeyes there. I want to buy your ribeyes. Will you take cash or gold? And the guy says, I'll take either one, man. I don't care. Well, which one are you going to give up for those ribeyes? Are you going to give up the cash, the dollars, or are you going to give up the gold coin? Right? You're going to be like, here's your dollars, man. Give me the ribeyes, and I got my gold. I'm out of here, right? And that's the way everybody would be. There's nobody in their right mind, except for a handful of people who don't understand what's going on, would ever give up the gold because the gold is the good currency. They would much rather use those dollars. And so the dollars are the bad currency. This is Gresham's law. Bad currency chases out good. The good currency, the gold, gets hoarded away. So no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to introduce a good currency because it would get hoarded away. And who would want to use a bad currency? It doesn't make sense. So the dollar was able to take over because it was trading with gold, right? You got a fixed amount of dollars to a set amount of gold. No problem. This was an equal trade, right? And so people thought that they had gold when they had dollars because they thought they could get a fixed amount of gold for it. It was when they realized that it didn't work that way and that it wasn't going to happen that they realized, man, I got bad dollars here. Whoop, all the gold disappeared. Now all you have is bad dollars in the system. So in order to switch that around, Gresham's law says that you're going to have to either have what is referred to as Thayer's law, which is having a good currency chasing out bad, which means that the bad currency has to completely collapse, become absolutely worthless before the good currency can step in and start replacing it. And now we can actually see examples of that taking place in like Zimbabwe or Venezuela, where they have like legal tender laws to say, no, you can't use the dollar here. But the moment that they do allow it, the flood of dollars comes in and starts buying things up. And all of a sudden there's a lot of people doing commerce and everything else because the new money, the good currency that is now coming into the system has started creating, all the economic activity out there. The only problem with it is that it's not a continuous supply of new money coming in. It's just people who have been hoarding it this whole time, waiting for that moment or the ability or just holding it on for security reasons. All of a sudden now floods into the system, takes advantage of the ultra low prices and how powerful those dollars are. But once that new money comes into the system, finds its way to the most industrious people, gets hoarded away, boom, back into poverty they go, right? Because that's just how the system works. It'll like the bad money will chase out the good money will get hoarded away. And so now all of a sudden, like the dollars are the more prized possession when you go out there and you start using it again. This is the problem that we see continuously out there. And another reason why it is you're going to find that it's going to be very difficult to replace the dollar. That's going to happen through, like I said, like a stable coin or a central bank digital currency of something like that, where it trades one to one with the dollar, like where people think, this is an equal trade that's happening right here, and the cash can slowly get pulled away as we're using the central bank digital currency or the stable coin or something else, and then one day we look back, we realize there is no dollars in the system, and that we're using a completely different currency, right? And so, in my opinion, it would have to go down something of that nature. Otherwise, it's like Gresham's law will kick in, and it's just not going to allow it. All right. Okay, guys. Oh, so much fun. And you guys are just loading me up with these super chats. So, I mean, it's just like, how do I quit? All right. All right. Midwest Cannabis, I'm tardy. Thanks for the chat, Uneducated Economist. Yeah, you bet. Good Lord, I'm losing coverage big time. Gonna type thanks to Simon and everyone while I can. Well, thank you, All Nighter. I am kind of out here in the barn a little bit because I was trying to keep all the ice and snow and stuff off the cars, which totally worked too because this vehicle's all nice and clean. All right, not the only one who is everywhere. All right, yeah, you're right. Charger Mopar. You're absolutely right about that. All right, just barely on this one wood floor. Okay, all the ribeye talk makes me hungry. Yeah, I love talking about ribeyes too. It's like my favorite. It's it's like there's few things that I really enjoy in this world, and a ribeye is one of them. All right. I'm thinking, but the moment, but we'll try and catch a live stream before I head out. Have a great night. You too, Crypto Beauty. All right. I'm ironically eating ribeye steak while watching this. Freaky. All right. At one time, Zimbabwe currency had an expiration date. Yeah, and I could actually see that taking place with like cryptocurrencies. One of the main things that I see happening, like with the whole MMT theory or UBI or something like that, like in my opinion, something like that is like a central bank's like a wet dream. Like they're like, oh my gosh, we can inject money into people's wallets, put a limitation on how long they have to spend it, which means that they are going to be forced to do it, and then we can tell them what direction it can go or prevent it from going in particular directions. Man, we got this. I mean, if they get that, it's just like like literally that would be like their ultimate fantasy. If they could ever come up with a fantasy, like a central banker's fantasy, that would be it. All right, you won't give your gold for the same price you paid in cash, but if they sell you something you want for a 10% discount, if they pay you the spot price gold, then you'd pay in gold. So, but okay, well, let's take that into consideration. So, if you're getting a better price in gold than you are in dollars, then yes, I would see that, right? Now, however, if that was the case within itself, then you would find that most likely. Well, I mean, let's say that it did. Would that actually drive people out to use gold in place of the fiat currency? Because I think in the end, the result of it would still end up being the same, in which that you would have a concentration of wealth, right? Because like basically what that would do is kind of like ignore the Gresham's law. And in that case, the concentration of wealth of gold would continue to take place, and then you would have the booms and bust cycles that come from it. So, yeah, I mean, I guess there is a way that if the people were to voluntarily offer up like incentives to use the gold outside of the fiat currency to pull that out of hoarding, then yeah, I mean, in a way that would work. But at that point, it would be an accumulation of cash, and I think people would probably find it counterintuitive to the discount. I don't know. I would have to think about that. Anyways, guys, let's see. 108. Okay. Oh man, Lumberjack Landlord joined the stream. Now I can't quit. What's up? All right. Now I know why I found this channel. Anyone whose favorite food is steak is a wise man. Oh yeah, absolutely, man. I love them ribeyes. All right, I put all my money into crypto, and if the power goes out, I'm going to trade my computer for payment. Who's always thinking? All right, what up, all nighter? Okay, go. That's a hell good. Simon had dad duty after my live. Yeah, no problem, man. I was just gonna come out here for an hour, but I can never just sit out here for a half hour. Like I like doing my live streams on my lunch because then I'm limited. Like I cannot like go any longer than a half an hour because I got to go back to work. But I get out here and I start going through these live streams and I can't quit. It's just like it's so much fun and it's just like, engaging and, knocking this stuff out. It's just like, I just enjoy it so much. All right. Do you think we'll have a recession in 2024? I don't. It's kind of funny. Like I was listening to a couple of interviews today talking about how like the Federal Reserve is planning on dropping their interest rates going into the future. They're all talking about mild recession and they're, whatever. And I thought to myself, it was a while ago. It was quite a while ago that I said that this was going to be a recessionless recession, right? And that people are not going to be experiencing what it is that they typically would experience through a recession, like mainly getting laid off from their job. Yes, there are a lot of layoffs happening, but there was also a lot of job openings within the service industries that I know people going from $100,000 a year job or whatever, working at some office, going to flipping burgers or serving burgers is not exactly like, a job shift that people want to go through, but it's not a matter of whether or not it was a good job. It's just that there is a job available. And that's more of my point to it is that if you are there's a lot of layoffs, but there's a lot of job openings and the unemployment doesn't necessarily rise through this. And this is kind of one of the things that we are experiencing through this. Um, we've had like the lowest unemployments in history, like even going all the way back to the Trump administrations. And prior to that, it's just like the unemployment doesn't really seem to rise dramatically unless like you're looking at like the pandemic or something like that. Unemployment stays fairly low, which means that a lot of people are kind of working in the eyes of the Federal Reserve. I'm not trying to argue that is the fact of the matter. I mean, you could probably put out there plenty of evidence on how there's not a lot of people working and how we're actually in this, major depression and all this other stuff. Absolutely. You could probably produce all that evidence all day long. That's kind of inconsequential to understanding the Federal Reserve's monetary policy, because if you really want to understand the Fed's policy, then you have to understand it from the Fed's view. And the Fed looks at unemployment rising as being their indicator on whether or not that the people are working, right? So if unemployment stays low, then in the Fed's eyes, that's like them achieving their mandate, right? They've achieved their goal. And I don't know. I kind of lost my thoughts on where I was going with that. About the recession. That's right. So the recessionless recession. Gosh, I lose it, huh? So anyway, so that's like one of the bigger issues, right? That's like the biggest issue for the people out there is that they don't want to lose their job, or if they do lose their job, be able to find some work somewhere doing something. And that's ultimately the condition that we are in today. This is how we are, right? And so in that sense, we're in the recessionless recession, right? Now, let's think about it from the corporations, because this is the other part that everybody hates about having a recession, is that you have to bail out the corporations, but the corporations don't really need bailed out. A lot of that had taken place during the pandemic, and I mean, I got this really great theory behind it. It's not even really a theory; it's the facts that happened, right? And even the Federal Reserve admits it. But ultimately, during the pandemic, the ultra low interest rates that were taking place as the Federal Reserve was doing their quantitative easing had given the opportunity through something called a special purpose vehicle for the corporations to gorge on incredibly cheap debt. Now, this special purpose vehicle ultimately didn't do anything. except for establish a credible threat that the Federal Reserve, in conjunction with the Treasury, was going to be buying up a lot of corporate debt. This little scenario that was talked about during the pandemic actually got the market to go into corporate debt, right? They started gorging on it themselves, believing that the Federal Reserve was going to be buying it and that they could front run them. It also was one of the only places that they could go to try and acquire any kind of yield, any kind of return on investment, considering that the US treasuries were practically at zero. So they were going into corporate debt looking for that fixed income anywhere that they could get it, and it was driving the yields down on these corporations, and they were just like loving it. They were just like selling that debt and just gorging on all this cash. Well, the smart ones are sitting on that cash, right? And they're able to make their payments and make their debts and do the things that they need to do. The zombie corporations are getting their heads knocked off, right? And they're failing right now, and that's where all those layoffs are coming in. This is playing out exactly how I thought it was going to. Now, it's not exactly like how I thought it was going to, because I don't know like what the Federal Reserve is planning on doing. I don't know what the government is planning on doing. I didn't know that they were going to have bank term funding program kind of things in which that they were going to bail out a lot of these banks who had a balance sheet imbalance. The balance sheet imbalance that was just going to cause them to basically create a contagion effect in which that a lot of these banks were going to end up failing. I didn't know the bank term funding program was going to come into existence. However, I did say that they were going to send out lifeboats, and that was it. Like, I didn't know how that was going to look or what it was going to work, how it was going to look, because they don't talk about that part of things. They talk about the toolkits. They use everything within their toolkit. I don't know what's in that toolkit. I don't think anybody really knows what's all in there. I think only they know what's in there, especially when it comes to unusual and exigent circumstances like the pandemic. And in that case, there is all kinds of stuff at their disposal that we don't know about. I mean, just think about all the stuff they pulled out during the pandemic. It was crazy, right? So, are we going into a recession in 2024? I think we're already in it. I think this is it. I think we're in a recessionless recession, and that at some point, when the Federal Reserve does lower their interest rates, because at some point they will lower the interest rates. Right? Now, I don't know if it's going to come as soon as everybody thinks it's going to. I mean, it could, but I have my doubts about that. But everybody seems to think that this is going to be happening sometime in the future. When they do that, it's almost always right into a recession. Right? Just go and look at a chart. Look at the Fed funds rate and take it back, however long you want. And just about every single time they begin to lower their interest rates, it's almost right into a recession every time, right? So it happened, in late 2019. And I would assume that as soon as they do it again, then you would probably be a fairly predictable indicator that we would be moving into a recession again. The difference on this one, though, is that even in those interviews that I was watching, the one of the was saying that the Federal Reserve made a big mistake in that their dot plot map said something about having this much of an increase, and they were 400 basis points off. And I'm thinking, well, you didn't. Okay, so they were wrong about the dot plot back then, and you're going off of the dot plot now being the indicator that they're going to be lowering interest rates in the future. So I mean, I get a very foul taste for anybody who kind of says the Fed screwed up and then wants to use their statement today as if it's going to work going into the future. It's like either you think the Fed doesn't do it or you think that they do. You can't just pick and choose when it is that you want to believe that they are screwing up and not screwing up. They didn't screw up the dot plot map before, or they did before, and they're not doing it now, or they are doing it now and they weren't doing it before. To me, that's all crap. I think the Federal Reserve is conducting themselves exactly the way that they thought that they were going to since 2018, when I read Monetary Policy Strategies for a Low Neutral Interest Rate World. Now, I'm not saying that it went out exactly the way that they were planning, but when they have a statement saying that they have a problem with an inflation expectation that is persistently too low rather than too high, I don't think they have that problem anymore. Like, It was their problem. It's not a problem. Why is it not a problem? They solved their problem. That's interesting. Like in all this crap that has gone down, and the Fed doesn't have a problem anymore. Like everybody else has a problem, not the Fed, right? The Fed solved their problem. They had an inflation expectation that was persistently too low. I don't think that's no longer their problem. Right? So they didn't screw up. This was very much planned, and I mean we've covered this so many times on this channel. We've covered everything from like the special purpose vehicles. We've covered like all the credible threat theories. Everything that's going down. Even like the neutral interest rate that not a lot of people talk about. See, this is another reason why I feel the Federal Reserve is probably not going to be lowering the rates, is that as the interest rates remain elevated, it starts pulling up the neutral interest rate, which is the interest rate that's neither accommodating nor restricting the economy. So if this neutral interest rate begins to rise, at the same time the Federal Reserve has stalled out on their interest rate risings on their Fed funds rate, then what happens is that the neutral interest rate gets closer to the Fed funds rate and becomes less restrictive to the economy. Right? See, like the Federal Reserve could sit there and could sit on their hands and say, nah, like the economy seems to be doing a little bit better. Like there's less restriction happening within the economy. Lending standards seem to be loosening up. There's more activity happening out there. I wonder why, if the neutral interest rate is rising and they're sitting on their hands not doing anything, but nobody explains that. Right? Nobody says that. Nobody talks about that. Like I rarely hear it in their speeches. They do bring it up occasionally. You will find some articles out there. You find a couple of people talking about it, but it is a very, very quiet part of their monetary policy that was major issue for them, back in 2018. The whole title of the speech, Monetary Policy Strategy for a Low Neutral Interest Rate World, right? And how to deal with that. It was like, I mean, not to say that it was brilliant, but it was very well crafted. I have to give them that. I mean, trying to put all these pieces together, you should see this. Like, I stack up so many of these things. These are all the speeches and letters and document and everything that they talk about. Like, I am constantly packing these things around. Right, going back through them, going, man, well, remember when he said this? Remember when they said that? You remember talking about, like, they can't come right out and tell us. There is no way that the Federal Reserve or anybody else who's working within this whole industry, this financial monetary strategy thing, there's no way that they could come out and tell us the strategy in its entirety. Because if they did, it wouldn't work. It would fail. It would fail immediately. Right? The fact that it is a secret, or that is not talked about, or not addressed, or I don't know how to explain this. Like it's here. It's like it's literally right here, right? But for some reason, it's not out there in the mainstream media. It's not out there in the narrative. It's not out there in the, maybe in the educational departments or something like that. I don't know why it's not there, but to me, it's as clear as, it's like crystal clear. It's like clear as day. It's like I can't, like, once you see this, I cannot see it any other way. People talk about government conspiracy stuff and all that, and I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't explain all this stuff. It doesn't explain, all these things that I talk about here. And anyway, moving on. How long am I doing this? An hour and 22 minutes. Great half hour. Man, this was the great half hour stream, guys. Half an hour. All right. With all the debts mathematically impossible to repay, does that make the currency worthless? I mean, I guess in a way, but it's just like, it might make it completely worthless, but then again, it also, if there is so many debts out there that need to be paid in dollars, doesn't it make the dollar the most valuable thing in the world, since more people want dollars to pay off their debts than anything else out there? I can't see where the dollar is anything other than major desire. Like, all I see is just like a huge desire to be out of debt and a huge desire to acquire the things from other people that they want, and dollars are the acceptable means of doing barter. I mean, it's just like that's it. It's just like I don't see anything else out there. And I do see a day where the dollar does fail. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I mean, I'm not trying to praise the dollar and say yay to the Fed or anything like that. That's not what I'm trying to get at. All I'm trying to get at is everything that I have studied leads me to believe there's nothing else that's going to be replacing it. There's no runner up, right? And it's sad because the condition in which that's in this is the worst part about it, right? Is that I don't try to look at things negatively, right? I try to look at everything with a very positive attitude, not because like economics is a very depressive, like they don't call it the dismal science for nothing, right? It's a very depressive like study. And there is like some really horrible things that are going to end up happening because of it. Like you got famines and and depressions and bad times and all the crap that people end up having to go through, right? And trying to just be like somebody who's just like, hey man, I'm just going to be accepting of all this. That's hard to do, right? I mean, it's like to try and look through all this stuff and just be like, hey man, this isn't a big deal, but but really it truly is. Yeah. Um, sorry, I don't know where I was going with that, but I mean, I guess, my point being on some of these things is that trying to understand it in a fashion that is like not one that of trying to what am I trying to say here? There's a lot of times you can look at this information and say, "Hey man, this is going to come down on me and this is going to be really bad and this is really heavy and this is hard." Right? And to take that information in that fashion will weigh you down. It will be a depressive, it will be hurtful, it'll be consequential to your life. That's not what we're doing, right? What we're doing is we're taking this information in and we're saying, man, this stuff is heavy, but what is it that I need to do in order to conduct myself so that I can then go through life and not get hit by the falling hammer, right? That's what this is really all about. And going through this stuff and learning it and understanding the strategy on a level that says they didn't screw up. They conducted themselves in a way that they said that they were going to do, and they pulled it off. They got their ammo back. They got the Fed funds rate up. They got inflation expectations running high. They got global growth about ready to start happening again. They got all the things. They got all the stuff, right? And to say that they screwed up is a strategy that says, well, everything that I mean, in my opinion, they didn't screw up. And so everything that this person has to say is based on the strategy that the Fed screwed up, right? Which means that I can't go along with it. Like, I mean, they might have great information. They might have all this great data information and points and talking points and beliefs and everything. But unless they address some of the stuff that I've gone through, all these speeches and everything, it was just like, I don't know. There's a couple of things I got questions on that say completely different, like they knew what was happening here. All right, guys, golly. I still think the energy is the ultimate world currency. Oil and food are forms of energy. In this economy, we are just waiting for the other guy to jump, just paying the cheering him on. Just praying and cheering him on. Gonna sell my silver tomorrow. Don't sell. Good gosh. I don't know. Maybe you need the money. I mean, what am I? What am I to tell you what to do? Don't go sell it, man. I don't care. All right. The last time I bought silver, the spot price was $12, and I was buying scrap. Yeah, that's a great way. I bought this necklace probably about 13 years ago, and I bought it for spot price. It was kind of like buying scrap. Yeah. I agree. Charger Mopar like selling picks and shovels. All right, the 40-year carnivore. The sun is the ultimate energy which gives life to all on earth. Bottom line is just play the game the Fed makes, buy low, sell high, and boom and bust. Well said. Yeah, and we'll see. That's just the thing. I mean, I put out a lot of information when it came to the lumber industry, right? And I was just talking about the things that I was seeing. And I'm just gonna tell this story, and then I'm gonna call it quits for the night because it's cold, and I was only gonna be out here half an hour. Um, but I know that there is no way that I would have been able to call out the lumber industry as accurately and as just as well as I did if it wasn't for the fact that I know some of the stuff about economics that I do. Right. And this is really where I think like a lot of people say, like, what can you do with this information? You realize, like, I was putting this information out and talking about it on video. People were hearing that video and then going and making trades in lumber and then making money off of it. Like, I don't know how to do that. Like, I don't know how to physically go and put money in an account and then go and turn that in a lumber trade. Like, I don't know how to do that. Like, I can go and buy ETFs, like the Woodstock ETFs and stuff like that. But when it comes to those future prices that I was watching, that's a game way beyond anything I could touch. Right? I mean, they're talking brokers and people who have hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars that they're trading every minute of the day. That's not me, right? That's not what I do. I do sales at a lumber yard, right? I mean, I work a retail counter, but I also talk with contractors. I have buddies who work at the mill. I have other buddies who work in the woods. I have buddies who drive truck. I have buddies who do sales in wholesale. I got friends every direction of this entire lumber market, and I have a view of macroeconomics. Like, I don't think there was anybody out there who had a position to see lumber as well as I did. Like, just literally standing at a counter, having the access to those like, very few people who are working a mill are going to know people who, like, you might have a buddy who works at the lumber yard or something like that, but the chances that you have a buddy who works at the lumber yard who knows macroeconomics is probably pretty low, right? So you would have to ask that guy, hey man, what do you think about the lumber sales? And he might be like, oh, dude, they're gouging the crap out of us. And you should like, and all this, and give him this opinion that isn't one of, dude, man, I can't find any lumber anywhere, man. The inventory's tight, man. I can't find it. Okay. See the two different opinions that might come from it. Understanding this stuff for yourself is a much different position. Right. So when I'm asking questions and out there, I'm taking it in from, in all ways. Like, there's no matter what conversation I have with anybody out there, it almost comes down to me taking in some sort of economic information from it. When I go to a restaurant, I sit there and I look around all the booths and I look to see like who's there, how old they are, if they have kids, what it is that they're eating, like how much food they're buying and stuff like that. I take all that stuff in. That's all economic information for me. I mean, it's just like it's a constant stream of it. And and I realize that it's people like us who have the position that we do that has firsthand access to this information far beyond quicker than anybody else. All these other people, all these rich people who are doing all these data analysis, and you see them on CNBC and stuff like that, they're all sitting around waiting for the information that we are living in real time. This is what's crazy about it, right? So that's why I was just like, I think it's so like, it's such a beautiful position for us to be in. Now, I mean, I know me personally, with this information, because somebody says, man, what do you do with this information if you're not like, making a bunch of money? I did make money off of it. I made videos, right? I made money off of that. But that's not the only thing. Like, I have positioned myself just in general in life in a so much better position than I've ever had. Like, you should have seen me 5, 7 years ago. I was deeply in debt. I had no vehicle. I had no savings. I had no portfolio worth, of stocks or cryptos or stuff like that. I mean, I had a little bit of silver holdings. That was it. That was like the only thing I had going for me, is that I had some sort of interest in economics and I had a little bit of silver holdings. But other than that, I had nothing going on. Over the course of the last few years, I have very much changed my life. I, cut back on a lot of the bad behaviors, hopefully all of them, and cut back on a lot of the bad behaviors that I was doing. And I've done things to position myself in a way that I feel that I can pay bills at will. And no matter what the fluctuation in my income is, I've kept my living expenses really low because of that. Like, I don't know if YouTube is going to be around next month. They've already like kind of shown their color, like their appreciation for the channel. I know that much is not much, it's like they don't really care about the uneducated economist. That's one of the reasons why, I've even set up that or started pushing that membership and providing more value through those membership videos, is because I feel that that's the way I'm going to have to go if I'm going to actually, try and excel through this world, is that I'm going to have to do something like that, is provide some sort of value and in turn, hopefully have a membership subscription to go with it. And then I could be like sponsoring myself instead of having to take some other sponsor out there or even worry about what YouTube is, wanting out of me. It's just us, right? We can do this and make this thing happen. And, that's really why I'm pushing it. Anyway, okay. I'm gonna go, guys. That was that was a lot, much longer than I wanted it to be. I thought it was a lot of fun too. So I hope, you enjoyed the babbling because that's kind of the way it feels. All right, but I can't help it. I got to read the last few comments here. It takes time and experience to discover your true comfortable self, usually at some point in mid adulthood. I agree. I mean, and it's when you find a passion, like me, I've always had a passion for economics. I just didn't know what to do with it, And when Miss Brittany put her fist on my desk and says, "Hey, go start a channel, dude," right? And I did it. It was just like, man, there's my outlet, right? Cool, an outlet, right? And so I was just going for it, and I realized, man, if you bring value to the world, then the world should give you some sort of return. And man, did it happen, you know? Uh, this might be a dumb question, but does inflation affect lumber? Yeah, of course it does, right? And that's one of the reasons why I just don't see the inflation scenario like a lot of other people do, right? Because where did the inflation go? It's not in lumber anymore. It all went away, right? Now we have to think like, what is inflation? Inflation is the expansion of money and credit. That's the easiest definition for it, right? That if you can expand money and credit, turn the light on so you guys can see me. If you can expand money and credit, then that is like ultimately what is going to cause price inflation, right? Prices moving up is the symptom of inflation. It's like the results, right? Inflation is the problem, price moving up is the results of it. So when you have the expansion of money and credit, that is the inflation. However, if you think back to like quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4, it failed to produce the inflation scenario that the Fed was looking for. In fact, that was the whole thing about John Williams' speech about the monetary policy, right? And let me read it again for you real quick because I seem to say it in every single one of my videos, is today we face an altogether different set of problems stemming from a very low neutral interest rate. That is, the short-term real interest rate that is consistent with an economy operating at its potential alongside low and stable inflation. Ironically, the problem we need to solve these days is the risk of inflation that is persistently too low rather than too high. So this was a major problem for the Federal Reserve, was the inflation scenario being too low. And yet they had just come off of quadrupling the money supply. Like more than quadrupling. It went from $850 billion to over $4.5 trillion. It was like 4.7, 4.9. I forget exactly where it landed at. But it was over $4.5 trillion from 850 billion. That was quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4. Failed to produce an inflation scenario. Like they did not get that inflation scenario of 2% that they were hoping for. It did achieve it a couple of times. Like if you go and you look at a chart of inflation, they did get to, the 2% target, got over a few times. But for the most part, they persistently, the entire time was under the 2%. They failed their inflation scenario. They failed to achieve it. And that's one of the reasons why they had to shift their inflation over to, or their inflation mandate. What is it? Their operations or whatever, their inflation target to an average inflation, right? An average inflation over time. And he actually talks about that. The second option, he talks about this, the average inflation targeting, whereby the central bank purposefully aims to achieve an above target inflation rate in good times when the lower bound is not constrained. Properly designed and implemented, such an overshoot can offset the inflation undershoot during bad times so that the long-run average inflation rate and inflation expectations are in line with the target. So, I mean, this is something that came out of 2018, right? And that is not, like, the average inflation rate is not something that anybody even talks about. Like, they don't even know that exists. Like, everybody that I listen to on the mainstream media and everything, like, within the economy, like, macroeconomic sphere out there, all say the same thing, that the Federal Reserve is going for a 2% target. That is not what they are doing. They are going for a 2% average inflation rate over time. And right here, this document talks about it right there. Right. And so I'm going to leave that up there for you so you can do a screenshot or go and check it out for yourself. Right. But in that document themselves, they say this is the Fed's new inflation target policy seeking to maintain well-anchored inflation expectations, right? Anyway, you can go and read all that. I'm not going to read it because we've done videos on this particular one many times. But I just wanted to read this one part. Okay, right here. Fed Jerome Powell announced the more significant changes resulting from the Fed's monetary policy framework review on August 27th, 2020. The statement of longer run goals and policy strategy explicitly acknowledges the challenges posed by the proximity of the interest rates to the effective lower bound. By reducing the Fed's scope to support the economy through interest rate cuts, the lower bound increases downward risk to employment and inflation. The statement also highlights that the Fed is prepared to use its full range of tools to achieve its dual mandate objectives. Its full range of tools. We don't know what the full range of tools are. Much like the Bank Term Funding Program, we just don't know what it is that they are going to use. To achieve their dual mandate objectives, stable prices and maximum sustainable employment. Notably, the Fed changed its language on inflation. This is important. The Fed changed its language on inflation, replacing its 2% inflation target commitment, and instead said it will seek to achieve inflation that averages 2% over time. The challenge is substantial departure from the previous flexible inflation targeting regime. Monetary policy under inflation targeting was symmetric. The Fed would equally respond to overshoot and undershoot of the target. The Fed lets bygones be bygones, since it does not attempt to make up for the past inflation deviations from targets. So this was the problem that they were having before, is that if they failed to achieve their target, they say, screw it, we're still just going for a 2% no matter what. Right? By comparison, average inflation targeting means that the policymakers would consider those deviations and can allow inflation to modestly and temporarily run above the target to make up for past shortfalls and vice versa. And so you wonder about the times that they were letting inflation run extra hot, extra long for an extended period of time. They were making up for the fact that they were letting inflation had run persistently too low. Now you think about it, this inflation that has been running high, this is now baked into this cake. This is baked into their formula, however they figure it out, because they don't really give us a formula on how they figure out average. But now this higher inflation is now in the average. We have to consider that, right? So if this average inflation is or if this high spike in inflation is in the average, even if inflation comes down, the average inflation rate is going to stay elevated because of that spike. And as time goes on, the low inflation, the failed inflation scenario that we had not achieved prior to 2018, that may still be considered part of their mathematical formula. I don't know because they don't tell us, right? They don't tell how far back it is. But if it is considered, that was running under, right? The 2% target. That is now dissipating away. That's time, as time goes on, that's less of an issue, right? Because the average inflation rate is now catching up. It'll start moving into the spike. So whatever inflation is, if inflation hasn't come down to the 2%, it's now incorporating this spike into it. That means average inflation rate is going to be up. It's not incorporating this underinflation shoot. Does that make sense? Like, because of the time prior failure to achieve the 2% target, that part of the average is going to weigh on the Federal Reserve, right? Or weigh on the average inflation rate. So as that time dissipates and goes away, the spike will become more of the prominent feature of the average inflation mathematical formula, however they figure it out, which means that the average inflation rate will be elevated because of that spike. I know this stuff is really hard to wrap your head around. I don't even know if I'm explaining it right, but to me, like this is one of the reasons why the Federal Reserve is still not going to bring their interest rates down, is because the average inflation rate is going to remain elevated because of that. And that's exactly what they are looking to do, right? They want to keep their ammo. They want to keep the Fed funds rate elevated. And so again, like I don't think I kind of explained how the inflation works, right? So now we imagine, like, if you can imagine, it's the expansion of money and credit that causes the inflation, right? But it's not really the expansion of money and credit. It's the added consumption that comes from the expansion of money and credit. See, like all that money can sit in a bank. If it's not doing anything, if it's not chasing any goods and services, then it's not creating any inflation, right? And this is one of the problems that we were experiencing through the quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? Is that that money mostly ended up just sitting as bank reserves, and unless it got lent into the system, it wasn't going to do anything. It just sat there. Well, this time around, we had a much different scenario in which the stimulus checks were handed out. And that would have been a flash in the pan because people would have enjoyed that new money, right? They would have been like, boom, here, well, let's go with the new money and go and buy the ribeyes and all that other stuff. But it would have been a flash in the pan. Boom, it would have been over, right? They would have spent that money, it would have dispersed, and it would have been gone. They might have created a little bit of inflation during the time as that added consumption, like, creeped and took it all away. It was the severing of the supply chain, which nobody, all the economists out there, and this is one of the reasons why I'll just go toe to toe with any economist out there when they talk about it was the money printer and not the severing of the supply chain. They can't explain lumber, right? They can't explain lumber at all. But yet I'm one who was at 1,700 per thousand when lumber was 3 times, 5 times higher than it should have been. And I'm one there saying, going, no, this is not money printer going burr. This is definitely a supply chain breakdown. And what are y'all going to say when the lumber prices come back down to normal? Here they came. Now, this is the reason why. Okay, it's because all that severing of the supply chain kept the kept the supply demand imbalance continuing. Right. When it came to lumber, it was a reestablishment right away. It's a domestic product. It's our trees, our forest, our equipment, our rails, our men, our everything's ours, right? So when we told them go back to work, boom, lumber, bam, no problem. Lumber, we got it, right? Because that's what we do. We can make lumber now, right? And it's like an awesome product for the United States. And so when it came to reestablishing the supply chain for lumber, it took like no time at all. And it was back in supply and the prices came back down, met the demand, and demand had come down dramatically too. But it doesn't really matter when you think about it, because really the lumber prices should be even cheaper today, considering that they have an added rail cost right now going to Chicago. So really the lumber prices didn't have that added rail cost before. It was to a central hub up in the British Columbia area. So again, like the new money coming in, yes, that adds to the consumption, and everybody's going to run out there and buy ribeyes, right? And they're gonna enjoy those ribeyes. But unless that new money constantly pours in, they're not going to be able to continuously buy those ribeyes, creating the shortages that causes the supply and demand imbalances. That comes from the severing of the supply chain and telling people go home and don't go shop and don't go out and don't do all these other things that you would normally do as a human trying to survive, right? So if you sever that part of things, then yes, you're going to have this imbalance. And then even on top of that, when people are expecting to get a return of the supply chain through like the Federal Reserve even said that we're looking for help from the supply side of things, but yet at the exact same time they started raising rates. Right. So now here you have the supply side of things going like, hey, you know what? I'm a supplier, manufacturer, retailer, distributor, truck driver, all the other stuff that goes along with it. And you're telling me that you want help from me? And you're telling me the help that you want from me is going to also come from you putting out effort to damage the very person that I need in order to invest into? Like, I mean, I want to invest into this manufacturing, distributing, wholesaling, all the other stuff that goes along with it. But if I go and invest into that, you're telling me that you're trying to hurt the person that I need to do that. Why would I do that? Supply side's not going to come to help, right? And they were looking for help from the supply side. They were like, well, we're really hoping the supply side steps up and really helps us out with this. And I'm like, that ain't going to happen. What you're going to do is you're going to prolong the inflation. And that's what's happened. And that's exactly what happened from it, right? So, I mean, none of this is confusing to me. Like, it all makes sense. Every bit of it. I look at every corner of all this stuff, and I mean, it's just like, I could really put all the pieces together and say, man, I mean, I have like, this is like what took place during those times. I mean, I have my reasons, my evidence, all that other stuff. I'm gonna go in. It's cold. I can barely be out here anymore. This was a lot of fun, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. We got 157 people watching right now with over 205 likes going on. $42 in super chats, which you guys are always so amazingly supportive of the channel. I can never thank you enough for that, especially with the way things are kind of going right now. And I appreciate everybody who has joined the channel, become a member of the channel. Our live streams for the membership only viewers are just incredible. They are so much fun. We did one yesterday. I'm going to release it tomorrow. And it was talking about the bond buyback program. We completely broke down the entire press release on the bond buyback and then had a great long discussion talking all about everything within that. It was awesome. We had some really, really good comments within this live stream that really discuss like what to expect from this bond buyback program. So if you're really interested in that particular event that is coming, like I mean, in my opinion, it will be an event. I mean, the last time the Treasury bought bonds was back in late 2000 or late 1990s and early 2000s. So for them to go back into that kind of program again is very well, is probably going to be very surprising to a lot of people, but to us who had been part of that live stream, we're not going to be surprised by anything. I mean, we know what's going to be happening, what's going down, and and totally be ready for it. So, all right, so if you really enjoy that, come back to the channel tomorrow. We're gonna have that posted up. I'll probably post it like say around the afternoon, maybe around 10 o'clock Pacific time. Okay. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.